I'm Pete Holmes, your city attorney. Just want you all to know that you're going to hear about a great program today that I'm proud to sponsor this room so you can hear about the work of a partnership between the city and the county. My partner in crime, County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg, and I have been happy to work together on this amazing program you're going to hear about today. And it's all because what I think everyone in this room will agree is that we know the war on drugs has failed. Traditional prosecution is not the solution to every problem that we have. It used to be a sacrilege for prosecutors like Dan and I to say something like that, but here in King County and in this city, elected leaders like us, community groups, and even the crime victims themselves have found one of the most effective answers to the question, what do we do instead? Law enforcement assisted diversion, LEAD. Jail used to be the only answer when an officer engaged with a woman in the North Precinct who was selling her body simply to survive. Jail used to be the only answer when law enforcement encountered a man with a couple of grams of heroin in his pocket. And I'm happy to say that here it's not the case anymore. LEAD is about providing a robust response to people facing real problems without overusing the jails and the courts. We're providing alternatives, treatment, counseling, and most importantly, support to move people up and away from traumatizing and dangerous conditions. The LEAD program has been truly transformative. But don't get me wrong, prosecution does remain an important tool because it's essential that when you have someone who needs services but sometimes might need that nudge, that's how the partnership with prosecutors and with law enforcement is providing an additional boost. Sometimes it's that very threat that will push a person to engage with services. And there's a harmony here that you're going to hear about today between law enforcement, prosecutors, defense, social service agencies, and today I hope you'll grow to learn more about this program and help us to get the word out. LEAD began in 2011 in a Belltown neighborhood. It has since grown to serve the East Precinct and the West Precinct. The North Precinct has been served by LEAD since July, everywhere north of the Ship Canal, that is. And our City Council has just dedicated money to expand LEAD in the South and the Southwest precincts, which means that all of Seattle will soon be served. Plus, King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg, who will speak here in just a moment, has recently announced that LEAD's going to expand in Burien. So it is truly a program that is on the grow. And with that, I want to introduce my friend and colleague, Dan Satterberg, our County Prosecutor.
Thank you and good morning, and thank you for coming here. And I know a lot of you are on the ground and know all about LEAD and could teach this course, but this is also designed for us to go back to the places where we work and to our neighborhoods and to our offices and make sure that people who should know about LEAD do know about LEAD. And I think we've taken it for granted to some degree. So I'm really excited to see this multidisciplinary packed table full of people here who have really come together over the last 8 years to make this real. You know, the essence of criminal justice reform is the ability to question the outcomes that happen in court and ask, can we do something better? Can we build something that doesn't exist today? And do it with the community and do it with an idea of helping people get better if they are addicted to drugs or if they're suffering from a behavioral health disorder. Can we build something better than the courtroom? And by saying that, we don't necessarily criticize what we've been doing, because cases have come to the courthouse and to the jail over the decades, not because we're the best option necessarily, but sometimes because we're the only option, we're the only thing that's been built. And this is certainly true in the area of drug addiction and behavioral health disorders generally. They come to us because the police are asked to do something, and they have that tool of arrest, and they bring the cases to the jail and the courtroom, and we've developed some tools and that are complementary to LEAD. And I always want to give credit to the drug court program in our community we had for about the last 23 years. But drug court has a different model, has a different approach. The cases in there are usually people who are facing prison sentences if they fail. The drug possession cases started in drug court, but over the years, there hasn't been a good resolution for them in drug court, and most attorneys in drug court won't recommend that their clients go through drug court if they're simply facing a simple possession. So we had to build something that's complementary and that had more capacity. King County Drug Court's the largest one in the state. We have room for about 300 to 350 people at any one time. Obviously, our substance use disorder problem in King County is a lot bigger than 350 people. So how can we build something that goes out into the community, that's community-based, uses the leverage and the moment of arrest as an intervention point for people that we can then bring that degree of help to people. You know, the LEAD program for me is a recognition of what we often say, many of us coming maybe late to the game, to say that substance use disorder is a brain disease. It's a medical issue. It's an illness. And we also say we can't arrest our way out of it. Those two things we've said for many, many years, and the LEAD program is finally the embodiment of the answer to show that we can walk that talk, that we really do believe it's a brain disease and that it ought to be dealt with a medical response. And we really do believe we can't arrest our way out of it. And we don't want these cases in court if they can be dealt with in the community. So I'm very proud of the infrastructure that's being built, that's being expanded. The LEAD National Support Bureau has helped 20 other jurisdictions across America, and I know there are even some international visits that we've had from people wondering, how is it that you can do this? And of course, our response is, well, how is it that you can't? How is it that you can't offer help to people if you really believe that substance use disorder needs to be dealt with a medical response? It's about making connections to people in the community. And though, you know, America is going through this tremendous behavioral health crisis right now, over 70,000 Americans died of drug overdoses last year. 45,000 Americans took their own lives. This is a tremendous issue, and we have to build compassionate, community-based responses that are really connections with people who want to help people get better. So LEAD is about connections, not convictions. It's about help and not handcuffs. It's not an endless due process train that leads to nowhere. It's an immediate opportunity for law enforcement to call in somebody who can, a case manager with the persuasive superpowers, with a bag of resources, with the ability to connect with somebody and say, how can we help you do less harm to yourself? How can we help you do less harm to the community? It's a harm reduction format which, you know, our community desperately needs, and frankly, America desperately needs. So we're proving that we can do it here. We want to export it to other communities that want to try something different and something new. But it all starts with the ability for people to sit down together, to share our common concern about our fellow citizens who are suffering, and how can we alleviate their suffering? How can we increase justice, reduce suffering, increase the peace in our community, and do it together and do it in a sustainable way. And so part of that is the community education part, which is what today is about. So those of you who know a lot about it, I encourage you to continue to talk about it. Those of you who are learning about it for the first time, bring in others. It should not be, after 8 years, a mystery about what LEAD is in Seattle and King County, but I think that we're still a pretty well-kept secret. So with that, I want to turn it over to CAROLANNE Sanders.
Thank you for that powerful introduction, Pete and Dan. Thank you all for being here today and joining us for this exciting panel discussion. My name is CAROLANNE Sanders, and I work for King County in the Department of Community and Human Services, and more specifically, I sit in the Behavioral Health and Recovery Division. In my role as jail diversion specialist, I oversee the county's contract for the LEAD program, and I also work with the rest of my team in the Diversion and Reentry Service section to provide technical assistance and to inform policy as it relates to the intersections of our criminal legal system and our behavioral health system. LEAD is a team effort, true all the way through, and so while we have many of our partners up here on the table, there are a lot of folks who are integral to this program who are in the audience or who are not with us today. So before we move forward, I just want to acknowledge a couple of other folks. Major Howard, who's joined us today on behalf of the King County Sheriff's Office, Leo Floor, Director of DCHS, Seattle City Council and King County Council, as well as the taxpayers of King County who have graciously funded the LEAD program through the MID. Our True Blood grant funders at both the state and federal level, and LEAD's fearless thought leaders and earliest advocates, Dan Satterberg and Lisa Dugard. Thank you for being here. Oh, and I wanted to give a special thank you to our former director of Be Heard, Jim Bollendroff, who's joined us today from the University of Washington. Jim is really credited with forming the Diversion and Reentry Service section at Be Heard and really bringing the full resources of our behavioral health system to bear in support of the county's commitment to pre-booking diversion. So thanks for joining us, Jim. All right, so let's talk about LEAD. LEAD originated in Seattle as a pre-booking diversion program pilot and has since spread to over 50 cities across the country and cities across the globe. It has been rigorously evaluated by researchers at the University of Washington, and it's become a part of our public service infrastructure through funding at the city and county level. LEAD is currently undergoing some pretty exciting changes, both in terms of a geographic expansion to serve the south end of King County, as well as a categorical expansion that has allowed us to move and sort of expand our scope beyond the original population of LEAD, which was really folks whose law violations were stemming from substance use, to serve a higher acuity mental health population through our True Blood grant. We have a fantastic group of panelists with us today. Starting at my immediate left, Tara Moss is Seattle-King County's lead project director with the Public Defender Association and has worked in Seattle's nonprofit field for over 15 years, including at Street Outreach Services, Real Change, and currently PDA. Tara has a deep passion for social justice-oriented practices utilizing a harm reduction framework. TRACY GILLESPIE is PDA's lead project manager for Seattle Police Department's East and North precincts. Prior to joining PDA, TRACY worked in social services for over 12 years, including as a lead case manager and a screening and outreach coordinator. Rob Brown is sergeant of the West Precinct's anti-crime team and has been with the Seattle Police Department for 22 years. Captain Sean O'Donnell is a 37-year member of the Seattle Police Department, having served in all of the SPD precinct areas. And he's currently assigned to the assigned as the North Precinct Commander, where he's been since 2015. Theodore Bowe is Chief of Police for the Burien Police Department and is excited to support the innovation and hope that programs like LEAD bring to the Burien community. BRANDIE Flood is LEAD's program manager with Evergreen Treatment Services REACH and received her social work training from Western Washington University and the University of Washington. BRANDIE was born and raised in the Rainier Beach neighborhood of Seattle. John BOUSQET, who I think is on his way to join us, is a 41-year-old Filipino music producer and father of two. John is in recovery from heroin, cocaine, and meth use, and hopes to be celebrating 1 year sober on February 14th. HEIDI Hughes is Executive Director of the Friends of Waterfront Seattle, the nonprofit partner to the City of Seattle to reconnect the city to its central shoreline with a 20-acre public park. To ensure that the waterfront is safe for all, Friends partners with LEAD to improve community health and safety on the waterfront. NATALIE WALTON-ANDERSON is a senior deputy prosecutor in the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. NATALIE has worked as a trial attorney in district, juvenile, and the felony division, as well as a prosecutor in mental health court, where she developed a passion for treatment and collaborative courts. And Heather AMAN is Assistant City Prosecutor with the Seattle City Attorney's Office. After almost 17 years of mainstream trial work, she has found her niche as prosecutorial liaison for 3 harm reduction programs, LEAD, LINK, and VITAL. Thanks for joining us, everyone. So Tara and Tracy, I'm going to start with you all. There are a lot of people on this panel, As project managers, tell us a little bit more about your role with LEAD and how you work alongside all the other folks to make LEAD happen.
Well, first, I just want to reiterate the mission of LEAD. LEAD is a public safety program, but we utilize intensive social services rather than relying merely on traditional criminal justice methods. So the individuals who are referred to LEAD are committing low to mid-level crimes because of unmet behavioral health needs. And LEAD provides resources in order to actually address those behavioral health needs, to reduce that individual's criminal behavior and increase public safety, rather than relying solely on incarceration and convictions. So the Public Defender Association, we are the project management team of the LEAD program. However, LEAD operates very much so as a consortium of voluntary partners within law enforcement, the prosecuting attorney's office, community programs, and our social service providers, which essentially means that every operational and policy decision is made as a collective. So our role really at PDA is to, one, make sure that we are actually upholding the mission of LEAD, and two, to ensure that all of our partners want to continue to participate because they believe that LEAD is both equitable and effective.
And I'll just add on, what does that look like kind of day to day? I'm so honored to be amongst friends, and they've become friends because I chase them down to really see what they think and what they need. And some examples have been, let's just say being proactive with Captain O'Donnell when we were rolling out North Precinct and going to the North Precinct Advisory Committee meetings and going to CSTAT and seeing what your needs of your precinct were, and then really coordinating with you about what areas did you want to use LEAD as a tool, and doing kind of the same thing with Chief Bo, and attending meetings like HEIDI's meeting of the Waterfront Enforcement Coordination Committee. I hope I said all those right.
We need to get a better name.
Yes. All right, thanks. Blame the name. I appreciate that. But understanding what that committee needs, what they're seeing in terms of crime, where LEAD can be a tool, where it can be adjusted, and going back and reflecting and coordinating with the West Precinct around that, and meeting with prosecutors, make sure the program's working as we agreed it was going to, and making sure that case managers have flexible funds and really make sure that that program is beneficial to the participant in a harm reduction model. So those are some examples of how we do that.
LEAD is a pre-booking diversion program. Some of our audience might not be familiar with that term. Tracy, can you break that down for us and then also sort of walk us through what the LEAD process looks like from referrals onward?
Yeah, so LEAD, the inception of LEAD did start as a pre-booking arrest diversion program, and we are absolutely still operating that way. But there are technically two referral pathways into the LEAD program. So one is if an officer comes across an individual who is committing certain agreed upon offenses that are associated with drug use, mental illness, or extreme poverty, they can make an immediate diversion to social services, which means that our REACH program is on call 24 hours a day and responds to the place of arrest or the precinct in order to do a warm handoff from that officer to start a continuum of care in the services. However, the most popular way actually to refer into the LEAD program is a social contact referral, which means that officers don't have to wait if they know individuals who are eligible for LEAD for a point of arrest. And also community members can make referrals so that they do not have to just simply rely on calling 911 for individuals that they know really just need intensive services. At that point, though, those are really just the gateways into the LEAD program. But what happens after that is an ongoing, indefinite continuum of care and collaboration and information sharing with all of the partners to make sure that, one, we are providing services that actually meet the individual's needs, and two, that their criminal behavior is actually decreasing.
So the mission of LEAD is to achieve public safety. Captain O'Donnell, I would love to hear from you on that one. What does that look like from your perspective as law enforcement, and how does LEAD differ from business as usual for your officers?
Hi, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. My exposure with the LEAD program initiated back in 2011 when I attended a meeting with King County as assigned to the West Precinct, so I had some familiarity with it. I was assigned in 2015 as the commander of the North Precinct, and part of my assignment initially was to assess and find out just exactly what our major crime problems were, our call loads, what were they for. And I was able to determine that it was related predominantly to narcotics, prostitution, homelessness, recreational vehicle camping, encampments, and repeat offenders involving low-level crime disturbances and mental health issues. My staffing at the North Precinct was relatively low. We are the largest geographic precinct in the city. It was problematic for me to try and figure out how I could impact those problems with reduced staffing. I was approached by Tara in 2018. We worked out a very good collaborative relationship on how we would go about initiating the program in the North Precinct. I was supported very strongly by Chief Carmen Best and my senior command staff, and we went about identifying when we were going to initiate, and that was back in July of 2018. We established some relationships within LEAD, and then I set about identifying within the precinct structure, command structure and supervisors how we would go about actually assigning our people to work into that problem, to assure that we had good support for officers ahead of time, and that they understood and were educated about what the problem, what the program was about. We actually went to the West Precinct and the East Precinct and took a look at their program, how they had initiated, and what some of their good things were, as well as some of the problems that they had experienced, and we tried to avoid some of those. We set our command staff in place for the program and moved forward. The LEAD program to me seemed to be a win-win circumstance. We would be getting the help needed for these type of offenders, low-level offenders, getting them diverted or even better referred ahead of any criminal involvement, so that they could get the attention that they needed. It just seemed like a win-win, common sense sort of fix. As we developed our relationship with LEAD, we found that we were going to have a 24-hour access, as Tracy talked about, a warm handoff for our officers to actually have these individuals involved in these situations handed off to LEAD personnel. And we're very hopeful as we move forward. It won't be too long before LEAD has a physical building in the North Precinct, so that that continued fast response and warm handoff is possible. That's one of the things that is an enabler for us as officers, but it works best in the program. I assured that my officers understood that there was strong support both from senior command staff and from the precinct for the program, that our expectation was that they participated, and the officers have grabbed on very strongly to this as a problem-solving sort of program that helps us avoid the repeat offender, repeat call type low-level disturbance. And it gets, probably most importantly, the help to those individuals even ahead of time. So we continue to work on that collaborative relationship. We expect to, and we will look forward to some of the continued successes that we've had. The North Precinct's had more referrals than we had anticipated, so the program is working.
3 times the amount when he says more. We thought 50 in the first year, and they brought us 153 in 6 months.
Thank you.
Chief Bowe, I know you have some thoughts about this in relation to Burien.
Sure. First off, thanks for having me, not only here, but also inviting Burien to participate in this program. New chief in Burien, and one of the first things you do as a new employee anywhere is try to figure out the lay of the land, what's going on. And as you look at Burien, we're seeing this huge rise in our social disorder crime, and we're actually seeing our violent crime rate dropping. So I start looking at what am I as the chief going to do to start addressing this? And when you start talking to the officers, you find out the officers are super frustrated because they recognize that what they're doing now is not working. Arresting people over and over again is not working, and the officers are begging for different options. You find the business community is frustrated and is looking for different options. In a lot of cases, you find the offenders are really frustrated because all we're doing is telling them either move on down the road or we're booking them into jail, but there is no outcome. So I did a case study, and I looked at one individual just to show what kind of impact this has on a local budget. I had one individual who's been arrested 32 times and served 210 days in jail in the last 2 years. Cost of Burien, $48,300 in incarceration costs. That person is right now trespassing. I almost 100% will assure you, because we aren't doing anything to fix the underlying cause of why she's trespassing. I should clarify, all of her arrests are for bus conduct and criminal trespassing. That's how much the cost of Burien on those offenses. So as you look at it, you have this broken system right now. We're kind of doing the definition of insanity. I'm going to keep booking you. 5 days later, you're going to come back out. You're going to continue the behavior, and we haven't solved anything. So as I start looking at what's an innovative response, what's an innovative way to solve these problems, the LEAD model makes complete sense. It's the same thing that Captain O'Donnell's talking about. Is as you look at the problem, it's obvious that what we're doing right now is not the right answer in this targeted area, and it's taking away the attention to more important things like the violent crime and the other areas we could be focusing law enforcement attention on. So from my perspective, this is kind of an obvious solution to an obvious problem. It's not earth-shattering that we would go down this road. It's actually the answer that makes sense if you look at the problem. So from Burien's perspective, it's a great opportunity. It's innovative. It fits with what a growing, vibrant community needs to solve the social disorder component of what's going on in Burien, and it's a great opportunity to be here. So thank you.
Our operational partners are in the process of standing up the LEAD program in Burien, and we're in the process of putting together what's called the policy coordinating group right now, which is the governing body for LEAD, and we're hoping to be able to actively start taking referrals in the Burien area in a couple months here, so that's really exciting. Tracy, you talked a little bit about how LEAD connects people to social services immediately with a warm handoff instead of a jail booking. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about those direct services. Brandie, the terms outreach and case management, they get thrown around a lot, but we know that reach case managers take a very particular and unique approach to this within the harm reduction model. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
This microphone stuff's a little weird for me, so I apologize. So for us in the REACH model, we look at approaching our participants from a holistic point of view, and we're serving the whole person. So who they are, how they show up in the community, how the community has treated them historically. We start from that place, and so it's extremely client-centered. We really believe that our clients are really just having a healthy response to a deeply flawed system, that the outcomes really don't end up in justice for them. And so we start off from who they are, where they're at, literally and figuratively. And so we do that during long-term case management. There is no timeline on how they're gonna get services. We're really walking with them through their journey of transformative healing. We utilize harm reduction and motivational interviewing to make that happen for them. And our real claim to fame is doing it in street outreach. Like, we really go where they're at. If they're under bridges, we're meeting them in jails, in the hospital, wherever law enforcement is saying they're at, we're going there to provide them with services. And I think that's what makes it so powerful, that we are not making them fit into a system that's not designed for them. And so that's our approach. We're really looking at how they show up on the small level, transforms into what we're doing in larger systems that we know is not working. And so we're using advocacy to do that. We are removing barriers by working closely with our prosecutors to impact their law violations. And then we have resources there to actually help do things that people can't do in traditional systems. And so it might be from maybe their animal is the most important person to them. They don't care about themselves. So my approach might be that I'm gonna get what they need for their animal so they can build trust with me. We move at the speed of trust with our clients to make it happen, or it doesn't happen at all. And so that's how we approach our outreach and case management.
Racial equity is also part of LEAD's model and REACH's approach to case management. How does that show up in LEAD? Love to hear from any of the panelists and your thoughts on racial equity in the LEAD program.
You know, REACH, we really, it's the fabric of how we operate. We're looking at it on many levels, and we're approaching it on many levels. Not to say that we have the experts in it, but we're real fluid in how we approach it, especially right now during our current administration. People are going through hard times, and we see that coming out in our participants and our staff. And so we really make efforts to look at how oppression impacts our participants, how it impacts our staff, how it's impacting the resources that we're able to access. So one of the first things we do is really make sure that we involve staff that reflect the clients we serve in terms of cultural experience, lived experience, people really tapped into what's happening for our clients so that we can build trust with clients. When we look at how we do our case consults, we name the oppression in the room. So we're just not looking at the clients. We really don't even pay attention to diagnosis. We don't even want to start from that framework because in most cases they're misdiagnosed anyway. So we're looking at the whole person. So how has historical trauma impacted their lives? How did they end up into this place? What is really going on with the person? We look at our case consults from that frame of reference. Even in the little things in how we operate on our floor from a trauma-informed approach. And so our clients daily are telling us either with client voice or through behavior what they need in the space. And so, you know, we create little things. Sometimes our space is too many people. The stimuli is too much for people. We set up a system where we might meet someone outside and bring them into a quiet room. Or maybe we find a space within the community that they feel safer at, and we work along those lines. We very rarely, unless it's, you know, a real serious threat, bar people from the office. So if they're acting out, we're trying to tap into what's really happening for them in that moment. And so we're changing things along that nature. We try to create culturally specific programming. And so about 2 or 3 years ago, just in the conversations that we would have in our reception area with clients, a lot of African American clients, female clients, were like, we don't really have any resources. There's no place for us to really go in the community and talk about how homelessness is actually just impacting us. And so through those conversations, we formed the sister circle that's been going on for 2 years. And through that 2 years, we've even had 2 participants that have gotten to a place where we've done a little public relations training with them, and they're able to come with us and talk to newspapers and things of that nature, just having this space to talk about their needs. We also, through that, we started the men's roundtable, the Black men's roundtable, which Johnny's a part of as well, where they're able to do the same thing and have even partnered with the Sister Circle and doing some projects together. So just listening to what the clients need is a big picture for us. And then I think I have all these notes. And in the bigger picture, just as a whole organization, we're always looking at can we create an equity plan that means that by the end of this intervention, most of the marginalized people within our participants are doing better. So not just doing better by how we feel, but in numbers. Are we housing more marginalized folks? Are they having less law violations? Are they accessing mental health and other health services better than they were when they started the program? And then if we're not, let's change what we need to do to make that happen. It might have worked 3 years ago, but maybe that's not working now, and we want to make adjustments. So it's always at the center of our conversations. They're always hard conversations, but it's necessary for us to be able to do our work in the most transformative way.
It's always so hard to follow you, Brandie. You're such a moving speaker, and I appreciate it so much. I would say programmatically, I really appreciated Dan and Pete's opening remarks and talking about the war on drugs and it not working. And, you know, it's more common knowledge now that there was racial disproportionality when we're talking about war on drugs, especially for Black folks. 10, 15 years ago, that wouldn't be a sentence that I would say and everyone would nod their head. But this program was really built about the racial disproportionality of arrests, and especially Black folks, especially folks who are using drugs, things such as crack in this downtown area. And when we did this program, we wanted to make sure that those same folks were benefiting. It wasn't just someone coming down from the suburbs who really needed help and nowhere to go. And so we are always looking at who's being referred, why they're being referred, if they're actually a good fit for this program, and it's meeting our overall goal of addressing those racial disproportionalities from over a decade ago.
And I would add from a county's perspective, it's important to think about racial equity in the context of where our services are geographically placed throughout the county. You know, we were lucky enough to be able to start this program as a pilot in Seattle through some grant funding and through the readiness of our partners really to start something that was very untraditional and very innovative. But as we think about displacement and gentrification and where communities of color are being pushed to, we have to make sure that our services are meeting folks in those areas too. And so we have a commitment to serve all of King County through the mid, and I'm particularly really excited about our move into South King County and to be able to meet those communities where they're at. So I know you all get lots of questions about accountability within the LEAD program. People are normally referencing a frame of reference of court or sort of compliance-based models, and so LEAD doesn't really fit into that. What does accountability look like in a program where clients are playing a more active role in goal setting and where treatment and sobriety are not necessarily mandated? There's got to be a way of knowing if a client is making meaningful progress, even in a program like that. So how do LEAD operational partners hold clients accountable, and how do you all hold each other accountable in this frame? Sergeant Brown, I think I'll start with you on this one.
Thank you. So I think I have kind of a unique perspective here amongst the law enforcement at the table in that I'm not at the command level. I'm actually seeing how it's been implemented on the streets, and I've seen its great successes. And that's actually what brought me about in my journey to become a big supporter of this program. When I initially got involved in it as a sergeant, probably like most officers, I had a fairly healthy dose of skepticism, just based on the nature of what we do as law enforcement. You know, we're sort of an action and consequence-based organization, and that's sort of our mindset. And so, like you talk about with accountability, I think that a lot of officers may initially say, well, where's, you know, I see the carrot, where's the hammer, so to speak? And so what I found, how I've come about, is by seeing the successes. And that accountability you talk about is reached by the communication and the collaboration between all of the partners that are involved. You have law enforcement, you have the prosecutors, and you have the social service providers. And the communication that's going on is real time. You have meetings that are happening twice a month where folks are talking about the individuals, but you're having real-time communication out on the streets. You have an officer that already has an invested interest in seeing a client succeed because they're the one that referred them. And they're encouraging them when they see them out on the street. And they may see them engage in a new crime, that they're not progressing as you'd want them to be. And so that officer will reach right out, make a phone call right on the street to the social provider for that client. That social provider shows right up there and engages with them right there on the spot. So you're having an immediate addressing of whatever's going on in that client's life that they're not succeeding at that moment. And further, I sort of talked about the accountability part and how that it takes some buy-in by the officers. What you see is that if there's a new crime, there's kind of a misperception that they're getting a free pass, a free ride, that new crimes aren't being addressed. That's not true. You have an initial crime that gets the arrest diversion. Subsequent crimes are actually just better managed. It doesn't mean that they're not charged if they commit a crime, whether it be a drug crime or whether it be you know, a property crime to sustain their addiction. And what you'll see is that those are managed and discussed amongst the prosecutors, amongst the counselors, to try to best aid the outcome for the individual. Sometimes they're not engaging with their provider at all, with their, and they're out there on the street, they're on a binge, and they need to kind of cool off. They get arrested, and the best outcome for that individual is they go to jail that day on that new crime. They face the potential charges for that crime. However, they may be in a situation where they're coming up for an opportunity, such as a drug treatment program or housing. And if they miss that particular intake, they're out of luck, and they're out of luck for the next 6 months. And so it's best, it's this managing act that's done on an individual basis, tailored to that person's needs, for the best outcome, to try to encourage what they want to achieve. And again, I want to just circle back briefly to the officers and their buy-in. I know from my own personal experience, I'd love to sit up here and tell stories, I won't do that. But there are many great examples I can point to where somebody that I thought would never succeed. This program is best for those hardest to reach elements of the population, the ones that have been entrenched in their cycle of addiction for 2 decades. And they're out on the street, they're transient, they're hitting their crack pipe in front of the storefronts and everywhere else. And when I see that person, through this continued outreach on the streets by the police, by the social providers, takes traction and gets them out of that, gets them into housing, gets them to a place where they can actually successfully overcome their addiction, that's fantastic to see. And now, like I said, I initially started out somewhat skeptical, and now I'm a firm believer. I've seen great successes with this program, so I very much appreciate it.
NATALIE, from the vantage point of the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, what does accountability and lead look like to you?
In traditional prosecution, we are responsible as prosecutors for holding individuals involved in the criminal justice system accountable for crimes that they commit, for following through with whatever sanctions that are set before the court. I think within the LEAD model, we are accountable to our practice in terms of how we've been prosecuting traditionally and whether or not how we've been prosecuting is actually getting the results that we need, which is to ensure community safety and to actually address the underlying issues of why somebody is involved in the criminal justice system in the first place. And I know myself and many other prosecutors in the traditional model, in terms of holding people accountable, have made recommendations to the court and judges that we know standing there does not address the underlying issues, but it's because we don't have options, and we are just as frustrated as law enforcement in terms of having another tool. So within the LEAD model, accountability does look different, but we are still prosecutors. We are traditionally rule followers, and in this model, we get to actually look to the accountability of our discretion in terms of the decisions that we make based on a lot more information within this program. Beyond the foundations of LEAD in terms of addressing racial disparity and the fact that it's a public safety program, it's also really built on relationships and collaboration. And within that model, in terms of accountability, we have the ability to hold the LEAD program accountable in terms of the outcomes. Are we actually reducing individuals involved in the criminal justice system? Are we actually reducing their contacts with law enforcement, with the services that are being provided? Are we trying to break down those silos between all of the criminal justice partners and making sure that we are doing continued communication to further a result that ends this cycle of somebody continuing to be involved in the criminal justice system? And are we being accountable in terms of our referrals and making sure that we continue to address racial disparity that exists within the criminal justice system? The other thing I just want to point out in terms of accountability, or what this role looks like from a prosecutor, is just the criminal justice piece and the coordination. Having a prosecutor involved in this program is key because we are connected to so many of the criminal justice partners. We're connected to law enforcement, to probation, Department of Corrections, to the courts, to defense attorneys, and it's in that role that our role is unique. And we also have the ability to really engage with case management in a way that we have not been able to before. And with that information that is shared with case managers, that becomes a foundation for us to make different decisions based on that information. And so within the accountability role, we're also holding case managers accountable for the information that they're sharing, and indicating that that information is key for us to be able to make different decisions. And we're also holding ourselves accountable and making sure that we are acting as prosecutors in a manner that is somewhat different than we were before to yield a different result, and making sure that we are doing a check and balance of ourselves, that we are not making the same knee-jerk reactions that we would in the past, that the choices that we are making in terms of our prosecutorial discretion actually do address the underlying issues now that we have more options. And I think that's really key as well. I am going to point to one example of criminal justice coordination that came up within yesterday within the realm of this program. We had a Department of Corrections, community corrections officer who had an individual who is involved in a program very similar to LEAD, our VITAL program, in terms of the prosecutorial liaison role. And he had an individual that he couldn't confirm that was in treatment. And based on their own protocols and procedures, they would have to issue a warrant because he had no whereabouts about this person. And that CCO called upon myself and my colleague to try and figure out if there was some way for him to avoid issuing a warrant or confirming at least before issuing that warrant whether or not this person was in treatment. And between my colleague and myself, we were able to make multiple calls to our partners with Be Heard and the defense attorney and find out from the treatment agency and get that information that this person was in treatment and avoid that person having to issue a warrant, be arrested, and kind of start the cycle all over again. And I think that's one point I just want to highlight in terms of having a prosecutorial liaison in programs like this, is that we can actually help that communication, break down silos, and prevent some of the barriers that come up that lead to people not being able to be successful in getting out of the system.
Heather, the city-level prosecutor is, their involvement in LEAD is relatively new. Can you talk to us a little bit about why it's so important to have that municipal partnership and what that looks like in collaboration with the other LEAD partners?
Sure, thank you. And thank you everyone for coming. I want to point out that the Seattle City Attorney's Office and my boss, Pete Holmes, has been involved with the program since the beginning. What's new is having a dedicated prosecutor within the office, and that's my role, and that role began in April of 2017. And why I think it's important is with the expansion, it just was necessary. It was necessary to have someone within, sort of, I guess, on the inside, for lack of a better way to put it, someone who knew the Seattle City Attorney's Office, knew the Seattle Municipal Court, and who could be there in person to handle these cases. So I was lucky enough to be the one chosen, and I joined NATALIE and as the other prosecutor, creating essentially the prosecutorial team to address LEAD cases. My role is important because to do this effectively, you have to be able to think differently than a traditional prosecutor. You have to believe in the mission of LEAD. You have to be willing to proactively address the cases as they come in. So by having a dedicated prosecutor, I'm able to touch every report as it comes in to assist in the filing decision. When appropriate to file, then I participate in the negotiating of all those cases, and I appear every time that I can. And that's important for the credibility of the program and to make sure that the information sharing is happening. I'm able to bring the LEAD voice into the courtroom and create different outcomes for individuals. As NATALIE and others on the panel have pointed out, the more we know about the individual and the better we can address the underlying cause of the criminal behavior, the better outcome for everybody, not just the individual, but the community. And that's really what everybody wants. So I think that pretty much answers that question.
Thanks, Heather. Heidi, I want to talk to you a little bit about the other core tenet of LEAD that hasn't come up yet explicitly, which is community involvement. As a public safety effort, what changes have you seen in your neighborhood as a result of LEAD, if any? And specifically, what does it look like for you as a community leader to work with all of these other partners?
We've seen lots of changes. First, I have to say how much I love this panel. I've been involved as a community participant in LEAD since 2016, and I'm learning things about this thoughtful, rich program. So thank you for putting this together. This is really great. LEAD came about on the waterfront in 2016. We, as the nonprofit partner to the city to help build this park that's a waterfront for all, we're really interested in what's the ecosystem to make it welcoming for everybody. A place you could take your kids, your family, if you're experiencing homelessness, if you're a worker, if you're a tourist, when all those people come together, people from all over the region, how do you take a place like the waterfront? Waterfronts are historically kind of rough. And at the time when we started the LEAD program, there was a lot of chronic, regular criminal activity, just like what Sergeant Brown described, where people are hitting the crack pipe on the doorstep of the business. Businesses and residents are unhappy. You know, they're writing hair on fire emails to city council about this perceived inability to address the situation. Of course, we all know it was lack of tools. So Lisa Dugard and I went down and talked to some business owners and community leaders and said, what do you think about doing LEAD on the waterfront? So the body language at first was like this. Oh yeah, we've heard all about these programs. Here's just another one. And we said, let's give it a try. And at that time, Sergeant Brown was with the bike team and implementing LEAD on the ground. And I think his healthy skepticism also, you know, he was able to kind of transmit that to a lot of these property owners. So I think there was an immediate understanding and trust there that this was a really kind of thoughtful approach to address these issues. So we did a big push in 2016. I think that was really important for the results and the engagement, because as soon as those community members and leaders and business owners saw the results, they channeled their frustration into positive energy, with LEAD becoming this convening force. So instead of the hair on fire emails to city council, we had social contact referrals. We had people saying, well, you know, Mr. Smith is still on my doorstep, what's going on? You know, just this ordinary communication about how are we addressing these situations. And we saw results. After that first year, we had 31 referrals in 8 months. The community was so happy, they said, can we throw a holiday party to thank all of the outreach workers and law enforcement? And we have continued that. We just had our third one. And it is this kind of authentic engagement, wanting to know people on a personal level, what they do, how hard their jobs are, has made everybody understand that we're all in this together. It's not you pointing at that one who's pointing at that one to say, do your job, help my community, make this situation better. So that has been huge in the results. And since 2016 to 2018, we saw a 30% decrease in arrests and citations and a 40% increase at the free waterfront community family programming that we're putting on. So we showed that the streets feel better to folks, more people are coming out, and both of those things work together to complement each other. And the communication, I think, is a really important aspect. Like I said, the social contact referrals were on email. There's immediate results. And then the community owners also understand that things don't happen immediately. We have people with entrenched problems that take a little bit time to overcome them. But if you're communicating with the community, then they understand, okay, Mr. Smith is following up with his case manager. There's some things going on here. We can be patient. We want this to have a good outcome. And then there is what Tara talked about, where LEAD comes to our community on the waterfront with the neighborhood and participates in our public safety coordination. And then the waterfront community participates in the operational work group, which has been uniquely eye-opening to see prosecutors, defenders, caseworkers, law enforcement, everybody come together to really take an individual approach to look at real root causes. So this has really laid the groundwork for what we'll have with the future waterfront, because the big piece was the skepticism. Okay, you're going to build a beautiful waterfront, but how are you going to manage the neighborhood and the public spaces that it truly is a waterfront for all? There was a lot of skepticism about that. And through what the LEAD results have demonstrated, it's part of the ecosystem for the future waterfront of how the community, law enforcement, everybody comes together to accomplish the vision that we all want for the city.
You know, one of the things that I love the most about the LEAD program is that it is meant to take community safety seriously, and yet you all have figured out how to do that in a way that acknowledges the fact that our LEAD clients and participants are a part of the community too, and that their well-being is central to all of this. John, thanks for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, what the LEAD program has been like and how it has changed your life?
For me, it's been kind of like a dream come true. I sold crack to an undercover cop, and I thought for sure I was going to go to prison. I was during the worst time of my life. I had been recently divorced and lost visitation rights to my kids, and I had a really good music career, and I pretty much just walked out on that, and I traded it to be one of those guys smoking crack in front of your store, and I didn't think anybody cared about me, and I thought that's how I was going to die. And when I sold that crack to that undercover cop, two ladies came 2 hours later to the jail, and I thought they were going to try to like get me to tell on my buddies or something like that, and they were like, if you want to help yourself, we can help you. And they got me out of jail. They got me some new clothes. I hadn't changed my clothes for a couple weeks, and they got me some food and a change of clothes, and they told me to come down it was on a Friday, and they told me to come to the office on Monday, and we would make a plan to try to get my life in order. And I said, I don't know exactly what I want to do right now. I don't know if I'm ready to quit using drugs. I just know that I don't want to go to jail anymore, and I don't want my life to be so unmanageable, and they were like, well, just think about what you do want, and we'll talk on Monday. And I came on Monday, and at that point I had a really bad week, and I decided I didn't want to do drugs anymore, and I wanted to go to rehab, and they helped me out with that. I was in rehab within a week. I went to detox, and I don't know, it was when you guys still worked with Brenda Mayer. She was one of the treatment gurus or whatever, getting people into rehab, and she did something to expedite my way into treatment, and within a week I was in treatment. And when I got out, the LEAD program paid for me to live at clean and sober housing, and they would come and pick me up and take me to all my appointments, and they looked past the drug problem, and they wanted to see what was causing me to do drugs, and they helped me get engaged in mental health services and be consistent with that. They didn't just put me in the oven like a turkey and then walk away, and come back to see if I was done. They literally, they're like, I don't know, they have this term intensive case management, and to me, I don't know if this probably isn't politically correct, but it reminds me of Jehovah's Witnesses, because they always come back. And if they see you peeking out the blinds, they're going to keep on knocking, you know what I mean? Or they're going to text and say, hey, I saw you looking out the blinds, you know what I mean? Why are you treating me like Jehovah's Witnesses? Yeah, but the main thing that this program does is the intensive case management. I want to share a text. I haven't seen my kids in 6 years, and that's a big reason why I was getting high and drunk every day. And now on February 14th, I'll have a year clean, and I wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for my case manager, and all of the people like the Brandies and everybody that goes into that. But I get really down about not being able to see my kids, and I send my case manager Steve these awful texts about, why is this happening, blah blah blah, and I get texts back like, it's not fair how much you're having to go through just to see your blood and flesh. A lot of my friends and colleagues wouldn't be able to stick it out. Also, most people wouldn't be able to. We got some cats. I adopted some cats, and nobody told me that the cats were feral, but they are. And yeah. So, anyways, he's like, a lot of my friends and colleagues wouldn't be able to stick it out. Also, most people wouldn't be able to show the patience and compassion it has to get those cats to come around. You're one of my heroes. I'm gonna see if I can get you some cat food to do the interviews, and I know it's really stressful and stuff, but without us, there's no you. So without you, blah, it's like that's real stuff, like nobody pays them extra to say that, and the genuine heartfeltness that goes into that, you can't buy that. And a lot of times when I want to give up and throw in the towel and just go back to the way I was living and not have responsibility or accountability be part of my life, I think about the people that I'm going to let down, and that's a big deal. And sometimes that's the reasons why that's one of the reasons why I don't mess up, because I don't want to. Even though the times that I have messed up and screwed up everything, they came and picked me up. They were at the jail, and they said, "Oh God, what are we going to do? How are we going to start over?" I don't want to keep using those, you know what I mean? I want to be that guy that they ask to come and do stuff like this because they're proud of me and they know that I'm going to represent the program well. I still have mental illness issues. I still struggle with a lot of things, but I'm not smoking crack and shooting heroin today, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what they've helped me to do, and I wouldn't be able to do that without programs like that. So when people say, oh, you know, that's just a get out of jail free card, and these people aren't being accountable and all that stuff, a lot of people do use it like that. But for every 10 of them, there's one of me, and I'm actually getting a little bit of life out of my life today, and I wouldn't be able to have that, you know what I mean? And I pay taxes now, you know, I have a full-time job.
Those taxes can support leads.
Yeah. But what I mean by that is that it's the transformation of the shoe going on the other foot, and one day maybe I'll be able to help out people like they've been able to help out me, and for them to take the time and put their heart into that. They don't do it for the money. They're a special kind of people, I'll tell you that. Unless they're getting paid a whole bunch, but I don't think they are. It's like there's a fire's been lit under their butt, and they do it out of their heart. And another thing, just real quick, that I want to touch on is we worried, like, as you know, the clients, we worried, were the police going to buy into this? You know, are they going to make these resources available, or are they going to only go after, you know, just the white guys in the neighborhood, or these people or that people? And they really are going after everybody, you know. If they feel like you can use the services and you really need them, they're gonna, you know, like, I should be in prison right now, but instead I'm out here living my life, and I'm trying to figure out ways to get back in my kid's life. You know, we got lawyers and stuff working on it, and it's a possibility. It doesn't seem like it's such a brick wall now. It's going to be a hell of a journey, but I mean, it's happening, and I'm going to be here for it. So I'm really thankful for that.
I could have not thought of a better way to end that. So thank you again, John, for those closing statements. I think it's great to have you all up here, but next time maybe we'll just give it over to John. You don't need the rest of us. I also want to acknowledge John's case manager, Steve, who's with us in the back. Hi, Steve. All right, so this question is for all of our, whoever would like to answer. How is a client's lead participation used in other cases that are not eligible for leads, maybe other charges that are not eligible for lead? For example, a client is engaged with lead but is also charged with several assaults, non-eligible assaults. How will lead participation be used or factor into how that case progresses? Prosecutors, I'll hand that over to you.
It's not unusual for a lead participant to have cases pending when they enroll and potentially even pick up future cases. So this actually happens often, that we'll be in a situation where we have someone enrolled in the program and engaged in the program, and what do we do? And I think as prosecutors, this is where lead is a resource for us. Without lead, we look at the four corners of a police report and we look at the four corners of a criminal history, and we try to determine what's going to change that behavior, what's going to address that, that behavior, and what's going to bring change. When we have lead involved, we get the big picture of the individual. We understand what barriers they face, what they're able and willing to be starting to work on, and we can really craft very personal, individualized plans that can address the criminal behavior. So when an individual is engaged and trying, the prosecutors will take note of that and mitigate using the discretion that Natalie had spoken about earlier. If you're simply enrolled in the program but you're not working on anything, then your case will route mainstream. There's not really a basis for us to utilize that discretion. But if you are trying, we will look at it on a case-by-case basis, and we're really looking, when I say that, we want to make sure that a higher functioning person maybe is doing a little more than a lower functioning person. So we are really, really individualizing the ask in order to get the outcome that we're hoping for.
Caroline, can I just jump in a little bit? I just want to point out that Heather and I work, I work in Superior Court, where the majority of our cases are felony cases, and she works for the City of Seattle, where they're misdemeanor cases. And there's a big differentiation in terms of assaults. And so in terms of our office, there are no felony assaults that are eligible for lead, obviously. But I think the bigger thing is that the prosecutors can obviously use the information from a case manager and verification of that someone's engaged in the LEAD program. But any sort of resolutions involving property, personal injury crimes to victims or property crimes, those scenarios are addressed with the victim first. There are many, many cases where we have people that are involved in the LEAD program. They are actually engaged in services and doing much better than when the crime actually happened. And the onus is on our office, the prosecutors, to reach out to those crime victims, whether they be injury or property victims, explain the program, and hear from them on what happened to them, because that is really key and essential. This is our community that we represent, and we are responsible for protecting community safety. However, what I find when I call those crime victims and just explain, hey, this person's in the LEAD program, I want to hear how this crime affected you. And when we have a dialogue and talk about what happened to that person and the fact that this person that assaulted them or stole their property has chemical dependency and mental illness concerns, the vast number of victims that I speak to indicate that they have a family member or a friend or a neighbor that's going through the same thing. And ultimately, a lot of the time, I'm lectured about, well, as a prosecutor, you should be recommending these services instead of jail anyway. And so by the end of the conversation, you know, I'm like, you're right, we are doing it wrong. We are really doing it wrong. But I guess the key factor that I want to point out is that victim input is essential in terms of coming up with a different resolution in the case. And if we don't reach out to those individuals and make sure that they're a part of this program, they're informed about LEAD, they're informed about what is happening, what's not happening, what engagement looks like, the fact that it's voluntary, if we don't do that, we are not sticking to the integrity of this program, which is, it is a public safety program meant to address racial disproportionality in a collaborative mindset. And that involves our crime victims, our law enforcement, our community members, the people involved in the criminal justice system, everyone. So.
This question is for REACH and PDA. Can you give a general overview of the consenting process for LEAD? What does confidentiality and informed consent and record keeping look like?
Well, for all our participants, in order for us to start to share information with prosecutors and law enforcement, they have to sign an ROI that has all our partners listed on that. And our screening and outreach coordinators talk to potential participants about how we operate, how we share information, so they know for sure how we're going to be talking about what's going on for them. In terms of confidentiality, in terms of protected health information, we do guard that. You know, it depends on what is needed for the situation and how much the client is comfortable with us sharing, because we do know that some of those things become public comment. And so when we're making decisions with the prosecutors, they don't necessarily need to know the nature of their assault or everything going on with their mental health. They more need to know about their behavior and the plan around that. And so we are protective of how our clients are portrayed in that realm, especially our clients historically have just been described by their diagnosis or their behavior. So we think about that in the larger sense of not just public safety, but how oppression impacts communities.
So every one of our partners has their own role, which they bring to the table in this LEAD collaboration. And as Brandie said, all of the LEAD participants do have to consent and sign a release of information, which includes all of our partners, so that that information sharing and collaboration can occur from the beginning. But we really do refer to REACH and Evergreen Treatment Services as being the experts of clinical care. So they really walk with the participants to make sure that they are understanding what they are consenting to and going at the pace that actually makes clinical sense. And we defer to the pacing of REACH. They are the experts, that is their role. And so that we really lean on them to be able to walk through that process. And they are incredibly skilled at doing that.
Add one more thing. And the information sharing is really key for all the partners. And so for law enforcement and prosecutors to really take risks with our clients, we have to be able to create an atmosphere and common ground where we can share information. And so we take it really seriously with the partners. And so, you know, like she said, those operational work groups are remarkable, the conversations we have, the fights we have to get to this other end that's going to be a better outcome for the client.
All right. This question is about eligibility for the program in relation to criminal charges. Is there a plan to expand to more than just low-level offenses, since some of these folks have higher incidences of mental health or substance use disorder-related challenges? PDA, you want to take that one?
I'm so bad at rattling these off. So when LEAD was first initiated, we were only limited to be able, law enforcement was limited to be able to divert charges for felony possession, so the violation of the Controlled Substances Act, or prostitution charges, which is a misdemeanor and felony offenses. Since rollout, since July, actually, we recently started to expand our eligibility to include people who were impacted by mental illness and their criminal activity was due to that unmet mental health issue. And so we did a huge lift to try and figure out which crimes are actually associated with that population. And so we are expanding. We did approve to expand to include more misdemeanors, which include trespass, property destruction, obstructing an officer, unlawful boss conduct, and misdemeanor theft. Those were the ones that were most highly associated with those with mental illness. However, there are, of course, a lot of other crimes that are associated with these populations, those who are using drugs, impacted by extreme poverty. However, because we work as a consortium, we move at the pace that all of our partners are comfortable moving with. So first we agreed upon these crimes because this is the ones that all of our partners were comfortable moving forward with in an ethical and equitable way. And then once that rollout first continues, and LEAD continues to reinforce itself as an effective public safety program, then expansion continues to happen and more crimes we can discuss about adding on to eligibility.
All right, this question is also for PDA. Can you share any outcomes that align with the LEAD program goals that were outlined in our slide deck?
I see that I should answer this. And so what we want to talk about is that LEAD has been evaluated. This isn't just a feel-good program, but we've been rigorously evaluated by independent researchers at UW. And these findings have been published in peer-reviewed journals. They used a control group to make sure there was a high degree of scientific rigor, so like really hardcore evaluations. And they found out that LEAD participants were significantly lower in terms of their recidivism than people who went through the justice system as usual. It costs less, which I know really speaks to your heart, Chief Bo. And they were more engaged in services and in housing. They were more regularly placed in housing and a whole bunch of other things. Do you have our website up there? You can see more in our website in our LEAD Bureau if you want to know more about our evaluations. It's got about 60 pages worth of information in detail, and you have my contact information, so if you want to know about those evaluations, you can ask me and I'll point you to the person that would be the most informed to answer.
I'll also add that our evaluators at the University of Washington, Dr. Susan Collins and Dr. Seema Cliff-Asefi, they're with the Harm Reduction Research and Treatment Center at Harborview. They recently gave a very informative briefing to King County Council about the evaluation, which I can link to you all. So if anybody is interested and wants to watch that, connect with me afterwards and I will be sure to send that link your way. It was a really great in-depth debrief of the evaluation itself that I think would be a good resource.
I just want to add on that the evaluation was really based on the social services and whether those were effective in client-related outcomes, which we found that they were exceptionally effective. But I do just want to highlight HEIDI's experience because what the neighborhood experiences as far as public safety is incredibly important as well. And so the way that we monitor that is by being very involved in public safety forums and neighborhood groups so that we are actually taking their concerns very seriously and bringing them back to the table so that we can make sure that the neighborhood is actually feeling an impact and that LEAD is working where they live.
This question is for Sergeant Brown. Since implementing the LEAD program, what has been the response from officers on the ground?
So when I first got involved in the program, I had a squad of bicycle officers. Some of them were kind of salty veterans, some of them were newer. I sort of anticipated that the newer officers would be the ones that would probably be quicker to jump on board, a little more flexible and adaptable to it, less years on, and that older officers would be a little bit more entrenched in their ways and less receptive, more skeptical. What I found actually is that some of the, well, I can think of one individual in particular, officer on my squad, who was the loudest skeptic of the program. And he turned around to being the one that would make the most referrals. He happened to be very engaged on the streets. He's kind of a legend out on the streets, and he knows everybody out there. And he knows exactly, you know, what everybody's up to. And he is a great resource for the program because he knows who would benefit most by it. And so, like I said, he continues actually to this day to be a very vocal skeptic, but he also has made great referrals. And so I use that as an example. But it is a program, I think, that the buy-in comes from within when you see the successes. I know that's exactly my own experience. And so you can tell officers, hey, this is a great thing, and they're going to look at you, and they won't really believe that until they see firsthand that somebody that they've referred has come around and come back to them and thank them for referring them to the program, and that's very meaningful, and so that connects up. Yeah. Does that answer that question for you?
Yes, thank you. And Captain O'Donnell, we talked earlier about how the number of predicted referrals from the North Precinct, were way less than what has actually come our way. Can you talk a little bit about what reception for the program has been like in the North End?
As the precinct commander, one of my frontline tools to address issues is to apply the bike squads, and my experience was very similar in that we had some senior officers who were out there and as frontline officers out there, very involved in doing law enforcement, being involved in problem areas, and when we applied that, we found that, and initiated the program, we found that some of the senior members of the bike squad, very, very participative, and again, they know many of the people out there who are experiencing the problems and recognized it as a win-win referral situation where if we can get them connected to services, we're reducing our own workload, and with the explanation that it's going to happen over a transition, over a time period, and understanding that, and it's gone to other elements of my precinct, the community police team and other patrol officers, very strongly involved now, and that's what I believe that all those referrals are from.
All right, we have one more for the prosecutors. Prosecutors, how have you educated your traditional prosecutor colleagues about mental health challenges to better address these issues in the traditional court system? And I'll expand that to include behavioral health as a whole.
I think, first of all, education is ongoing, and I think the best point of education is to actually show my colleagues results and where they don't see those individuals as frequently anymore. I think most of the colleagues that I run into in terms of our intersection with lead participants in mainstream work are really surprised at the amount of information that we have, the level of engagement in terms of case managers that come to court that are able to speak to housing, progress, all of those things, and ultimately, many of my colleagues are interested to learn a different approach because, as I've said before, they're incredibly frustrated with our traditional model and seeing people return to the system over and over and over again. One of the other things that I think is really key in terms of educating my colleagues is making sure that prosecutors are thought of as allies and not foes. And that includes even just with behavioral health and making sure that treatment organizations come and actually seek us out to educate us. Because a lot of us don't know I had not heard about harm reduction until I started with this LEAD program. And so many of us don't know anything about harm reduction, motivational interviewing, all of those things, because we're inundated with file after file after file. We don't have time to seek out that information. So really, obviously the education component definitely comes from being within my office, and many are eager to learn a different approach that ensures reduction in criminal contacts, and also it's just the right thing to do to offer somebody treatment as opposed to jail, and we'd all love to do it if it's going to actually have a good result. But also, too, trying to align with people that haven't traditionally been our partners, and getting them to see that every prosecutor wants to do something to be part of the solution. And it's great for us to be able to see someone get better, because typically we see people dealing with the consequences of a choice they made on one of their worst days. And there's always a story on the other side of how that person got there. And we listen to that, we hear that. We have our own secondary trauma from things that we read, and unfortunately people in the criminal justice system, on drugs, mental illness that hasn't been addressed, they end up doing things that hurt their community, and it's not what they want to do either. So that's what I would say in terms of future education.
I think Natalie did a great job.
Excellent.
May I just
Go ahead.
I want to add on to something that Captain O'Donnell said, which is expectation setting. And one of the things that we really worked on is convincing him and him as law enforcement that this is a long game. This is long term. We see some of the most significant change in 18 months. That's a long time. We see some of the more common changes right away, but as Johnny has talked about, there's a long game that we're playing that we are more than happy to work with. But making sure law enforcement and community members and everyone understands that. I'm sure Heidi has had many conversations of you may not see a change overnight. And another thing that we as project managers have had to do in terms of expectation setting is we have done the saturation that is needed twice in the history of LEAD, and meaning that we have a case manager and referral for every participant that is deemed eligible, or not every, but a significant amount, so it's felt in the neighborhood. That was in our pilot in Belltown, and that was in Waterfront. So one of our jobs currently, it's been really great to get additional funding, as Pete talked about earlier, but as we have to do expectation settings within neighborhoods and community, that felt difference. We aren't funded to that level. And that funding really for us means case management. We don't have enough case managers for every officer right now in the city to identify individuals where the status quo isn't working. And so we have to talk as project managers about we are going to make a significant difference with individuals, but we need a lot more to do that from a community level. And I really appreciated community responding understandably to that, because what we still promise to do is over-communicate with you and hear what your problems are and see where we can focus. And I have sat in meetings with Captain O'Donnell with those kind of conversations, and project managers with other folks to see what's the best use of the limited resources that we have.
Okay, and our last question is a follow-up to a question that was asked earlier about confidentiality and informed consent. What records are kept and where?
For the client services?
Yeah.
So we keep both paper and electronic records, and they're kept at our office at Reach. These files really, the only people who look at those files are funders when they come in and do audits, like King County Behavioral Health, City of Seattle come in and look at our files and cases like that, but they're kept with the REACH program.
And then I'll add from the county perspective, King County's Behavioral Health and Recovery Division administers the publicly funded behavioral health system for the county. And so we have our own databases that contain behavioral health information on a programmatic level, on a county level, and then also on a client level. And so as partners, as operational partners in LEAD, we are able to come to the table in those clinical settings with the care coordinators and to be able to navigate those databases and use that information to inform the clinical decision making. So what that looks like in some cases is myself or my colleague Shanna attending some of our clinical staffing meetings and being able to help paint a more complete picture of how a referral or an active client has successfully or oftentimes unsuccessfully tried to navigate our system. So we can sort of look up and see if they have engaged in other programs previously, if they have shown up at our emergency departments, those sorts of things. But we are also beholden to the HIPAA standards and the 42 CFR standards that all behavioral health providers are required to comply with. So we're able to use that information collaboratively, but it's still protected and it does not live with any of these other entities and agencies at the table. And I'll also say that each of these agencies has their own databases and their own records that they use at their own discretion and that are protected as well. All right, well, I think that concludes our Lunch and Learn. So thank you all for attending, participating with us today. Thank you for a great Q&A, and feel free to follow up with any of us after.